came a long way from St. Louis. You climbed the ladder of success. I've seen the flashy foreign cars that were parked out in front of your fancy address. You came a long way from St. Louis. You broke a man of hearts between.
Hello there, and welcome to the Labor Day 2023 edition of the Radioactive Take with me, Brian Steibel, longtime commercial news talk radio guy, trying the video thing now. Well, it's not even really video, or at least not television. It's YouTube, and you're in the audience, and I'm just overwhelmed that you would find time in your Labor Day weekend to check us out here, or even after the fact. But today it is Monday, Labor Day, September 4th, 2023. We offer news and commentary, old school style, with a radio motif over WBQS, News Talk Radio, a fictive radio station, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the real deal. And we originate in Xanadu here in Florida, and we'll try to give you a reason to maybe send us some email in response as we work our way through the news and offer some thoughts on a couple of fascinating documentaries I just watched for the second time. Actually, one of them, I think, the third time, but we'll get to that soon enough. In the meantime, though, I thought we would examine some of the news occurring across the American landscape. So let us see what is being talked about here across America on Labor Day 2023. Burning Man. They got burnt out there, the burners did. Well, rained on at least, and muddied up. And not exactly locked in, but they were more or less prisoners of that temporary city in the northwest desert of Nevada. They didn't expect that kind of rain. They had to delay the burning of the icon, and I don't even know that that's taken place as yet. And, certainly not by my airtime here on Labor Day 2023. Good luck to them. They're getting out of there, and I guess they're going to set the thing aflame. And as we've pointed out before, playing with fire can be a dangerous thing. So best of luck to everybody that have had quite an experience. This one's going to be remembered in a way that previous Burning Men have not, if that is indeed the plural of Burning Man. I think it'd probably be Burning Mans, because, well, we'll worry about that next year. In the meantime, the lead singer, Steve Harwell, I guess, of Smash Mouth is dead. I never was much for that band. I never really listened to them, except their big hit, All Star. Like that tune. It's great. And we're sorry to read of his passing. And Jimmy Buffett, that news broke over the weekend. He actually died on Friday, as did Bill Richardson. And I could offer a few thoughts about Jimmy Buffett. And I certainly was impressed looking at the footage down there in Key West. It wasn't his home. I believe he died on Long Island, or Long Island, as they say, up there in New York. But, or at least out on the island. I think in New York they just call it Long Island, or the island, even though Manhattan's an island in and of itself. That this bridge connects to Brooklyn. That's the Manhattan Bridge, and I've researched this. It's got a very interesting history, the Manhattan Bridge does, but can't spare the airtime on this edition of the Radioactive Take to get into that. So we'll await another edition down the road for that. I wanted to... Oh, and one more obituary. This one just broke today, and I guess he just died today. Gary Wright of Dreamweaver fame. Not exactly a one-hit wonder, but that's the only tune I could have named by him, although when I read his obituary, I recognized a couple of others. But anyway, Bill Richardson's obituary is the one that caught me, and rather than doing my own personal tribute to him, and I could give you one, I met him more than a couple of times, I thought I would read this that I got off the internet. And let's see who its author is. Looks like a long one, 3 pages, but it's large print. Brian Steibel is the author of this obituary. Yeah, it's my personal tribute. I post precisely one place on the internet, and that's a news group. It's not even a website. It's left over from the early days of the news group, or of the internet, I should say. It's left over from the early days when the internet was only text, before the World Wide Web came into being, thanks to the fellow over in Europe. What's his name? Tim something or other. Came up with the technology to be able to put images on there. But the Usenet groups were just text and alt obituaries. I believe it's short for alternative .obituaries. I find it by just dialing up alt obits. This one still to this day is text, and this is what I wrote about it just a few hours ago. What I wrote on it, I should say. I wrote it about the late Governor Bill Richardson. I could also call him properly Ambassador Richardson, because he did a stint at the UN representing the United States, and man alive, is that a tough gig. Got a special place in my heart for U.S. ambassadors to the United Nations, and we'll get into that at some point in the future, I would think, here on the Radioactive Take. In fact, I can say with certitude, because one of the members of the Xanadu Hall of Fame, the late Gene Kirkpatrick, is somebody I want to tell you about one of these narrowcasts, but not this one. This one we pay tribute to a different late ambassador of the United Nations and also a longtime U.S. congressman from New Mexico, and also the governor of New Mexico. That's how I hooked up with him, as we'll explain in this piece here. Another poster posted in an adjacent thread this provocative question: when are some really important people going to die, end quote. Never mind that virtually everyone is important to someone, or at least I sure hope that's the case. But not far away on the alt obits running roster is the late Bill Richardson. And I submit that given the geopolitical world we all find ourselves here in the third decade of the 21st century, Richardson was one of the most important Americans anywhere. I say that not because of his long tenure as a U.S. representative, as New Mexico is hardly an important state compared to New York, Pennsylvania, California, and all the others where so many nationally significant events occur and so many political and or cultural movers and shakers live. And yes, I am considerably biased here as an AM radio personality who served the central New Mexico talk radio listenership between 2000 and 2004 at a couple of stations, most notably KKNS, where I hosted Radioactive Albuquerque with Brian Steibel. It was also on another station, but we won't detail that. But anyway, it afforded me the opportunity to meet and casually chat with Richardson, Governor Richardson, more than a few times during his 2-term run as New Mexico's governor. I've also been entrusted with several similar gigs in more important states, or the more important state of California, but never once met its governor. Whereas small states, the land of enchantment is huge in area, but so sparsely populated that there were but 3 federal representatives during my years there. These small states afford minor media folk like little old me to not merely repeatedly meet the state's chief executive, but actually get to know him a lot, or at least a bit, to augment whatever you know about him from his public service and frequent interviews. I put this in the plural thing, but I'm really just talking about Richardson here. I mean, it's his obituary, after all. And no, I never was invited to any of Governor Richardson's social events, but our paths crossed more than 2 or 3 times, and he knew my commercial news talk radio work, or at least pretended as if he did. No, what made Richardson so vital was that he was hands down the American politician whom the repressive North Korean regime most trusted. Sure, Jimmy Carter met the founder of the Kim dynasty shortly before Kim's death, and Bill Clinton jetted over there to liberate those two Americans detained. They were journalists, and even powwowed with Kim's son there in the process. Clinton did. And then Donald Trump met with the grandson, Kim, twice, first in Singapore and then later in Korea, even crossing the DMZ line into the north as a symbolically important stunt. But those were all mere presidential one-offs. Whereas Richardson made many trips to the Stalinist state in order to smooth out things whenever the Kim dynasty was rattling its nuclear swords or causing diplomatic mischief. I don't know why so many lower-level North Korean officials so favored the low-key Richardson's diplomacy. Maybe the ever-genial politician's polite personal style was a factor? But they did clearly respect him, and repeatedly so, over many years. Though I met Richardson a bunch of times, I never managed to get him alone in conversation, even for a couple of minutes. But had I would have probed him on why he thought he was so respected by those running the secluded peninsular state. So the next time the grandson Kim and his minions start upping the nuclear rhetoric, it seems to happen every 2 or 3 years or so, notwithstanding NBA icon Dennis Rodman's widely covered goodwill visits, I'm confident American foreign policy makers are going to regret not having the late Richardson still around to make yet another flight across the Pacific to somehow scale back tensions before any of their ICBMs are launched. Signed, Brian Steibel in Florida. Those are my thoughts on the late Bill Richardson, and he was a real nice guy, very friendly. The genial thing wasn't just for the cameras. And I actually even sat behind him at the only prize fight I've ever witnessed, and it was a corner seat. I was right behind him. He was right here, I was right there, and the boxers, when they were in our corner, were right up here. I mean, it was close. And as if I already didn't have something of a distaste for boxing, even though I've followed it over the years, seeing it in person is a different experience than seeing it on the television. I don't care how close the cameras zoom in. So that's Bill Richardson. And the great folks, the great programmers and hosts at Turner Classic Movies did us all a favor in the viewing audience today by staging a Labor Day special, a couple of documentaries, both about unions. And the president, Mr. Biden, was in Philadelphia today. And that happens every year. Whoever's president's going to make some kind of a Labor Day speech before some kind of a union or other labor-oriented group. And I don't know who he was talking to, but he made a very interesting comment, and I'm going to honor him for it. He said, too many politicians these days are afraid to use the word union. Instead, they talk more generically about labor. But I'm proud to use that word. He implied if he actually didn't use those words. And I think Biden's right. While my politics are decidedly centrist, I come from a union family. My dad was a union man. He was a bricklayer. But oddly enough, you might think, Louis John Steibel, the late Louis John Steibel, who only lived to be 64, and what on earth did I do on this planet to deserve 4 more, at least, years of life than he did? Dad was a good guy. Me, not so much. But Dad was, nobody disliked Dad. My mother had her problems, and everybody would have acknowledged that, including at her memorial service. I was polite about my remembrances of her, but several other people had some critical things to say, and she warranted it. But Dad, I wasn't at his funeral. I was out in Los Angeles working. and wasn't able to get to St. Louis, back to St. Louis. I was there on his deathbed, or with him when he was on his deathbed in St. Louis in February of, I almost said 20. No, it was 1986, February of 86. And I was there. I was expecting until he expired, but I was being summoned back to a law office I was working at the time in Los Angeles, and Mom said, "Dad wants you to go back." So I did. So I wasn't there when he died, and I therefore also wasn't there for his funeral. But nobody said bad things about Dad at his funeral. There was nothing bad to say about him. But you might find it odd that he was a union man, but also in management. In fact, he owned the company, along with my mom, Steibel Bricklaying. In fact, Xanadu, from which we narrowcast, was bought with inherited money that was generated by Steibel Bricklaying. And yes, Steibel Bricklaying was a union shop. We had union bricklayers. But Dad was also a member of that bricklayers union, Masons union. And Dad was a old line FDR Democrat, Harry Truman Democrat, and I loved him for it. Love Harry Truman. Have a lot of great things to say about FDR as well. So whatever my politics may have evolved into in the 21st century, I have a great deal of admiration for those who do the union thing, and that's why I was delighted to watch a couple of very interesting documentaries about union struggles. Harlan County, USA is set in eastern Kentucky, and it chronicles a strike by coal miners that started in, July of 1973, just a couple of months before I matriculated at Boston University, and lasted for 13 months. And it's quite a story. And the woman who directed it, Barbara Koppel, no relation, I don't believe, to Ted Koppel. In fact, I think she spells it differently, but it's her film, and it won the Oscar for the best documentary, and deservedly so. It didn't come out. It wasn't put together, and that's what you do with cinema verite. You get an idea, something that would be interesting to cover, some tableau, in this case a miners' strike, and then you get permission to bring your film crews in, and then only later in the editing process do you really have any kind of an idea what the final product is going to be like, because it depends on what happens, and it's not staged, unlike too much reality television in the 21st century, which pretends to be cinema verite for television, televerite perhaps, but in fact there's all kinds of coaching and reshooting being done by the producers in most reality television, so-called reality television, but not when you're doing cinema verite. You shoot what happens, you put it together in a way that hopefully makes a point, and Barbara Koppel sure did. Yeah, her point was coal mining ain't something you probably want to do, but a lot of people do it and put up with so much and really test their solidarity when they go out on strike. And I'm not going to give you all the scenes. There's a fine write-up of it that it's probably 2/3 of what happens in the film, maybe only a half, is represented in the Wikipedia write-up, but I would encourage you to read it if you're curious about the film. But better than that, you should catch it next time it comes around. Maybe this time you did on TCM. The other film is Roger and Me. I'm not as much a partisan of this film. This one was, by some metrics, the most successful documentary to that point. Harlan County, USA won the Oscar, but it didn't get much notice until it gained a cult following years later on places like TCM and other outlets that aired it. But Roger and Me was in the theaters and a big hit, made Michael Moore a star. And you might even say put Flint on the map, Flint, Michigan. And it is true that I'm identified somewhat with Michigan because my first, if you can call it success, so the first time I worked for a so-called heritage commercial news talk radio station was in Detroit. That's the great voice of the Great Lakes, WJR Detroit. I was there from 93 until 96, and then from 96 to 98 I was working at a suburban station up there in Oakland County. So I've got a background, a certain history with the Detroit area, but the way this film portrays it, Roger and Me, it portrays it as if Flint is thoroughly independent. And it is a good ways up. It's an hour, maybe even an hour, 10 minutes north of the city by the time you finally get to Main Street there. So it's apart from Detroit in a way that Pontiac, where I hosted the Pontiac Insomniac over WPON, in a way that Pontiac is not a separate part of Detroit. Pontiac's decidedly a suburb of Detroit, whereas Flint is at best an exurb. And it's a very interesting city. In fact, I had a girlfriend that lived there, so I was up there a lot. And I even tried to land a gig on the talk radio station there. And I've been trying to remember all afternoon. Maybe I should have looked it up, what the call letters of that station was. And probably still are. I guess it's still on the air. But I didn't get the gig. But I went up there, interviewed, auditioned, and went back a couple of times. But we could never get something happening. They just didn't want to spend the money to go local. And I understand that. When you pull something off the satellite, the fee is nothing. You get it for free if you're if you own a radio station in Flint, Michigan, or in Saginaw, Michigan, or in Grand Rapids. You get the syndication free, the syndicated programming for free, which makes it a tough sell for a guy like me trying to get a gig, even if I offer myself to them at minimum wage. And I probably would have if we could have persuaded them to open up their purse strings. But it so happens this film is all about that. It's not really about a strike. In fact, it's not about a strike at all, Roger and Me. It's about how, in the view of the filmmaker, Mr. Moore, how General Motors management, personified by Roger Smith, the guy he's trying to land an interview with throughout, it's all about how economically hard hit Flint is, and the film implies it's exclusively due to the closing of the Buick plant there. And it didn't close. It just scaled back the number of employees considerably. But there were still people working for GM in Flint. And that's one of the things that struck me as unfair about the film. And some of the interviews, I think, are poorly edited. And the camera work is poorly shot. First thing you learn as a cameraman or as a news photographer, as my friend Louisville Andrew would always remind me, I'm a news photographer. I'm not a cameraman, he'd say, and he was right. But anyway, the news cameraman, or news photographers, excuse me, not the cameraman, the news photographer. Thank you, Andrew, again. The news photographer working for Michael Moore didn't even keep the camera steady. It was jostling around pretty much the whole time. And there's no excuse for that. That's called lack of professionalism. And I know it was his first documentary, and more recent documentaries coming out of the cynical filmmaking mind of Michael Moore are better shot. So maybe we'll give him a little bit of a slide for having a shaky camera on the first one. But no, let's not. Let's hold him to the same standards. He's going to release it to the theaters through Warner Brothers, and he did, and it's a big hit. Millions, starting a huge career for him. Keep the camera steady. We don't jostle the camera around here. Our news photographer has a steady hand because, both hands are right here. I remind you, YouTubing is, at least as I do it, is a one-man band. And I can barely play guitar or piano. And you don't want to see me trying to do both at the same time, although I know some people can. And maybe play bass with their feet. I saw a guy do that. I saw a guy playing a one-man band in Los Angeles about 1982, 83, playing the bass with his feet, playing guitar, of course. He had a snare drum hooked up that he had, and a drumstick tied to his arm, and he's playing the drum that way. And I think he even had a harmonica rack. I have enough trouble playing one instrument. Well, anyway, now I'm playing a lot of instruments, although only metaphorically, because it's YouTube, and this is WBQS, and there's nobody else to back me up. So we're doing the best we can, and we thank you for indulging us through this narrowcast, which is just about run its course, I promise you. Anyway, what ends up happening is he gets a brief interview with Roger Moore. Well, no, Roger Moore was not in this, nor was Sean Connery, or even George Lazenby. None of the James Bond guys were in this. But Michael Moore did get an interview with Roger Smith, hence the title Roger and Me. And it's not much of an interview, and it's capping a film that, again, I think is very uneven because it portrays some of the very cooperative interviewees in a bad light, and I think undeservedly so. So that's my take on the radioactive take of Roger and Me, as well as Harlan County, USA. Email comes to Radioactive Seattle as I bump the microphone on my way off the stage here. Radioactive Seattle at gmail.com. And that'll do it for Labor Day 2023 for the radioactive take. We'll be here all week, and we certainly hope you'll take the time to check us out at least once or twice a week. And then how about a like? How about one of those thumbs up likes? And maybe, just maybe, you'd like to subscribe. Doesn't cost a dime. It's not like a magazine subscription. And besides, you can't find magazines hardly anymore anyway. But YouTube, you can find as long as you search the Brian Steibel channel. We'll be here. And we hope you'll be there on the other side of the YouTube camera. So with that said, we offer a left-handed salute for Labor Day 2023 over WBQS.